What's up, guys? My name is Chris Harders. This is Men's Modern Dating Secrets. This is episode number 12. This is the dating advice for the good guys, the guys who want to get this figured out so you can have a great relationship, great dating life. You're not trying to change who you are, but you do want some strategies and ways of thinking about dating that are going to help you. If you're listening to this podcast right now, I'm on YouTube and I have a fun little whiteboard behind me. I set up this silly function of what to do when you don't know what to do and you're with a girl. And here I have what do you do? And I have it set equal to the function of the variables time, location, people around you, and intensity of the interaction and connection that you have so far with the woman. So if you're like me, if you grew up with a lot of science and math in terms of your background or programming, maybe this seems relevant to you. If you're not, you don't worry about it. I just have fun. I just have fun thinking about things in certain ways. And as I was planning this podcast out and thinking about the content and what do you do when you don't know what to do when you're with a girl? Well, I started thinking, what are those variables? What are those factors that were I to really start taking a conscious thought into what I was doing right now at this point for me, this is unconscious competence that I have with the skill of knowing what to do next. But not always. Every once in a while, I have to pause and say, wait, what do I do here? What's going on? And then I take inventory on about these four things. I take inventory on time, like what time of day is it? And really, how much more time do her and I have together? And based on that, I make a decision of the 5 things that I'm about to share with you of what would be the most useful thing to do next. Now, also, when I'm with the girl wondering what do, I take into account where are we right now? Where are we located in relation to maybe where she lives, where I live, where within the vicinity itself, is it a place that is promoting the type of atmosphere and connection building that I want? Or is it hurting it? Or maybe we met in a very public place. As we got to know each other, it's like, hey, I want to get to know you better. I want to be in an atmosphere that's going to better facilitate either deeper connection or maybe even, a kiss or make out or even more if that's where you're at with the date and the relationship or the interaction with her so far. And this really works for you, whether you are just meeting a girl for the first time or if you're on a date, if you've already seen her a couple times even, you can still follow this format to begin to gauge what would be most useful to do. So again, location is going to have a big impact on the decision I make of which of these 5 to do. Now, next is going to be the people in the area. So if you're listening, I have got a Michelangelo level, high quality stick figure group of a bunch of stick figures together. And it's about the people that are around. What are those, what people are in the atmosphere that will change the dynamics, the energy, the flow of the interaction for the better or for the worse. And what do you need to adjust there? So that's another factor that might come into your decision of what do you do. Let's say you want to get to know her. The people around you are super loud, or maybe it's just a disruptive atmosphere where people are bumping into each other, or maybe you bumped into her, you complimented her, and then she had a very positive response. And you're like, oh man, oh wow, okay. Woo, I want to keep this going. So what do I do? Well, the place you're at right now, let's say it was on the street or on a college campus and people are moving around, the hustle and bustle probably isn't useful for what you want to have happen. So you would say, oh, okay, this isn't working here. Well, why don't we move? Why don't I take that action of moving and then we can have a conversation? So you would move to a place that's going to better facilitate the type of connection building you want to have happen. And then lastly, in terms of interacting and determining what to do, the final factor is that intensity factor. How well do you guys get along? Because if you're not getting along at a certain level, well, it wouldn't make sense to go back to your place or to even throw that out there. It wouldn't make sense if it doesn't seem like you have any sense of rapport or attraction or she seems interested in you. Certainly wouldn't make sense for you to try to kiss her, right? Well, then what do you do? And then how do you improve that interaction? So these are the 5 things that I came up with. These are the 5 most common things. And I've had many wild interactions over the years where maybe one of these 5 wouldn't have been quite the right the right thing, but it was an outlier situation. Typically, one of these 5 will be a useful option for you to move the conversation forward or move the interaction forward so that you and her can get a better sense of each other. You can really test for compatibility. At the end of the day, that's a big factor. I don't see enough coaches, unfortunately, talking about, but it's such a big deal because, yeah, you and a girl you can find her attractive, but what about that compatibility factor? Because beyond maybe the first or second date, certainly beyond a couple times sleeping together, well, you're going to want to make sure you guys have some compatibility if things are going to go anywhere. So just seeing how the two of you get along and interact with each other, you get to experience that through the interaction. So the more you can create an interaction of flow, the more useful it's going to be for you. So here's the 5 things. Number 1 is to move. So moving is oftentimes a useful action to take. Moving will involve venue changes. It might even just involve moving somewhere different than you are right now. So let's say you were to meet a woman on the street or on a college campus or at a coffee shop or something, and you're just like, begin the conversation with her while she's standing up or while she's moving, and she stops for a second to engage in conversation with you. Well, she's eventually going to just begin moving again or feel kind of uncomfortable standing, especially if it's in a passageway where people are moving back and forth, like it's a hall or a busy shop or something like that. So then she's just going to sort of feel uncomfortable and then want to end the conversation unless you move and you say, oh, okay. And you can take account of this in your own mind and say, oh, you know what might actually really help is if I were to go just anywhere else so that she and I aren't blocking other people moving around. Remember, people is one of those factors to take into account. But if it's just sort of awkward because the two of you are standing in a place that isn't conducive for connection building, well, then you can move. And then after you move, you might begin a conversation again, or you might do one of these other things. So moving is useful for changing venues, for just improving the overall interaction when you guys are together in wherever you are meeting or whatever venue you are in. And then certainly you can just, again, maybe it's also moving in order to go from a more public place to a more private, intimate place where you and her can have deeper conversations and also be a little more physically intimate than you might be able to be in a more public place, barring, let's say, bars and nightclubs where sort of certain levels of physical intimacy are way more common. But then it's also the opposite end, right? So maybe you started at a place that was just not the right vibe for what you're looking for, or maybe you started at a place that honestly was a little bit too soon. So maybe you invited her over to your place, and when she gets there, there's clear indication she's giving one-word responses. She's giving closed body language. She's closing her arms. She seems a little bit nervous. She's not really holding eye contact. There might be an indication, especially if this is early on in the interaction, maybe she isn't comfortable coming to your place yet. So then if you're taking inventory of what's going on, you're like, what's going on right now? I'm not getting the form of interaction and engagement I was hoping for. Well, maybe you need to go to a place that's a little bit more public, where she can feel a little bit more comfortable. That's actually going to help you move the interaction forward. So sometimes you got to take that step back to move forward. If the step forward that you were trying to take was too soon, if you're like, hey, come to my place. I've heard some very interesting stories over the years, and I've heard stories of guys, they'll tell a girl, hey, come over to my place, and then we'll go to this place, and then they bring her in, and maybe they want to begin a conversation there, maybe they want to show her something at their place, but she's clearly showing signs of not being comfortable yet. She doesn't know him enough yet. So, well, then just leave and go to that place that you were talking about going to first. And then you can come back later on when she feels more comfortable with you and show her whatever you are going to show her, your record collection, your cat, your book collection. I'm big on collections right now, even though I don't necessarily have any myself, but you can show her that thing that you're going to show her again when she's more comfortable with you. So moving is always an option. It's always useful. It can also be useful. Let's say so we talked about location, moving for time. Well, let's say you're on a date and things are going well at this first place, and you're at a bar and the conversation is going really well, and you're saying, oh man, I do want to move now and go to the second bar, go to the second spot, go to this taco place. Well, what's useful, what a lot of guys don't really think through is, hey, you know what? Maybe I need to calculate what's the length of time that it's going to take to get there, just generally ballpark. And then also, like, let's say you have the option of ordering a second drink at this bar or going to get tacos. Well, you can kind of do the mental math in terms of what's the timeline of this date. So if you do a second drink, it's going to be basically double the time that you've been in the bar so far. Generally speaking, that'll be somewhere between 30, 45 minutes. So that puts you at an hour to an hour and a half. That might be long enough where she says, hey, you know, it's been nice knowing you, like, have a good night. And at that point, were you to offer tacos, she's kind of like, dude, night's over. Like, we can do it again some other time, but night's over. But if after one drink, you're like, hey, let's go to this other place. Well, now you and her get to share more experiences with each other by going to the second place, by getting this taco. And that's the interesting thing, because it's really depth of conversation and shared experience, which helps cement a relationship, really helps things go that are meant to go. And so you can help yourself by saying, oh, I see what's going on here. I'm at a moment when the bartender says, oh, do you guys want to do another round? You have that moment of thinking, okay, so if I order another round, I'm committing to X amount of time more at this bar, which does eat into the overall texture of your date. And the thought is, okay, well, maybe you want to do a couple places in a single date, which does create more experiences and does give you more opportunities to do unique things together. Well, then you may not want to order that second drink. You may want to go somewhere else. So that's how time really becomes a factor. Let's say your things are going pretty well already, and the bartender asks, do you want a second date? And let's say it's a little bit later in the night, and she's already indicated she's got a relatively early morning, and yet it's not too late. Maybe it's 8:30 or something like that. Well, now you get to start thinking, okay, well, with time, would I maybe want to suggest going back to her place or her going back to my place? There's nothing wrong, as long as both parties are consenting and excited about it, to go back to one of your places and have a drink there or do something else there. And so you just get to start factoring in this time element, this place element. And then you can start factoring in the people. Maybe you chose a spot that's great, but the people there are killing the vibe. Or you met her at a place that so people are killing the vibe. So this happened to me. I remember like setting up dates and getting to the bar, and now I'm a little bit better at planning dates and helping students plan dates and checking, and always useful if you're planning a date to check the venue, like their events section, to see if they have any events coming up or any events that day. Because I've gone to places where it was trivia night, the time that I was having the date. And the problem with trivia night is, while some people like trivia, some people don't, everyone's got their opinion. It's not necessarily the best thing to do on a date. It's not going to create a lot of bonding between you and her. And you're really just going to have this person blasting out in a very loud voice trivia questions and hearing people give answers. It's just not the right vibe generally for a date. Now, if you're a trivia buff, she's a trivia buff, trivia yourselves out. Go do that thing. But generally speaking, that's not going to suit you. And then lastly is intensity. So when we're talking about moving and the intensity, let's say that there's a good amount of intensity going on. Let's say maybe you've even like made out with her or something already, right? So when it comes to that, well, then you would maybe move to a place that's a little bit more private because you feel comfortable there. So anyhow, that's number one, moving. You get to start taking into account these factors as you're thinking about moving. And the next one would be an activity. So let's say you run out of things to say. You're just like, man, I'm gassed right now. I'm having this conversation. I don't know what to say next. Well, an activity is a great thing to do. You can do simple activities like you can play a silly game like 2 truths and a lie. You can, there's a game that a lot of girls used to play when they're young. You might want to Google this. That's called MASH, M-A-S-H, and you could play that on like a cocktail napkin. And I'm really using the bar thing as a reference right now. It's just on my mind. It's not the only place I've done dates. In fact, I've played MASH at a graffiti spray paint park before, and it was a really fun activity. But the idea is that while you're doing this activity, it's giving you guys a chance to engage with each other. Oh, one other fun activity is to like notice other people around you, and then you pretend to be one person and then she pretend to be the other person, and then you like talk. So when he's talking to her, you talk, and then when she's talking to you, she talks, and you have like some sort of ridiculous accent while you're doing it. And then as you're doing it, you like are developing this very silly backstory. Maybe you're spies, maybe you're ex-lovers or secret lovers, or there's some sort of weird dynamic between the two of you. That would be really fun. Maybe you're just like paper salesmen who are upset that the paper sales business isn't going well. Like you could have a lot of fun with it. And the more creative you are, the more fun it can be. But anyhow, an activity is an option, and it doesn't just have to be verbal. It can also be, but like that's going to take up some time, right? And usually these are more on the playful side. Now, it can also be something like, let's say you're planning a date and you're like, oh man, I don't want to have to think too much about what to say. Well, if you have an activity involved, it's going to take some of the pressure off you. So this can be something like, let's say you're at a bar and you're like, and it's a bar that has games, and you can go play Jumbo Jenga or skee ball or any other games that are there. The act of playing the game is going to take some of the pressure off of the verbal side of things, of really having to flex that muscle so much, and you can just be in the moment playing that game. And even in the book Persuasion by Robert Cialdini, he talks about how when you're doing something with somebody else, that it actually will create a stronger bond between the two of you, because there's this rapporting that happens by doing the activity together. So that's an extremely useful thing to do. And so all you have to really do when it comes to an activity is factor in time a little bit, how long the activity would be. This is generally going to be a no-brainer, but if you were to want to play Settlers of Catan or some sort of like game, you would want to take that into account. And it is just always useful to say, okay, well, how long, what's this activity in terms of time span? Where's that going to fit with the way I'm laying out the rest of this date? Location, obviously, there's certain activities that are going to be more useful for certain locations. The people around you, this probably won't be too big of a deal, but let's say you want to do an activity. Let's say like I recommend it, like Jumbo Jenga or something. Well, before you even suggest it, you may want to take a quick glance of, is anything available? So I often do that, let's say, is just check in. Okay, well, what's available right now to do an activity with? Yes, you can always do the verbal things. There's little hand things you can do too, where you put out your hands, she puts them on top, you try to slap her hands before she pulls them away. There's silly activities that you can do in little games, but if you were wanting to do something more physical, you got to make sure that it's available and a possibility. And certainly on a date, an activity like maybe it's playing mini golf or I mean, there's any number of things that you can do on a date, but just factoring in, okay, well, what's the texture of all this going to be like? The activity thing can be really useful for. Now, yeah, people around, and then intensity. Generally speaking, activity is going to be really low barrier. It's like she's going to be willing to do it regardless, so it's not too big of a factor. Now, intimacy. This is another one. This is number 3 of the options that you have. And these aren't in any particular order. In fact, talking is probably the top one that I would recommend people generally do. But I have seen some instances where it is definitely not the thing that I would recommend. So we'll get into that. So intimacy, physical intimacy is what I'm talking about here. It's significant enough because it's unique enough that I'm putting it in here right now. And this involves any form of physical intimacy, from a fist bump to a forehead kiss to kissing her on the lips to a makeout to more than a makeout to sex, to I don't know if there's anything beyond sex, but to beyond sex, if that's a thing. And intimacy, generally speaking, well, if it's something like a kiss, time's not going to be too big of a deal, right? But you may want to take into account, okay, well, how long have we known each other? Generally speaking, I would say the bigger factors for whether she will be comfortable with a kiss is first going to be intensity. How comfortable does she feel with you? How comfortable is that connection right now? Next will be people, in terms of, are there people just around where she's going to be really self-conscious if she were to kiss you? Certainly if there were friends around or people she might be afraid would judge her, let's say, then she might be second guessing. Even strangers, if it's a really busy place, she might be thinking, I don't know if I want to do this. And then also location, like she may not want to kiss you if I don't know, let's say you meet her on a sidewalk or at a grocery store, may not be the appropriate place to do that physical activity. But it's just useful to be like, oh, okay, well, that's in my thought process. Now, when might it be useful? Well, if you have a strong level of intensity with her, if there aren't a lot of other people around, if you're in a place where she feels safe being a little bit more physical with you, then intimacy, physical intimacy could be just the right thing, especially if there's enough time. And I guess what I'm talking about here is more on sex. So it'd be useful to just keep those in mind, right? So what would be a good place for sex? Typically your place, her place, hotel, something like that. Typically not the nightclub, not the coffee shop, right? So it's just being able to monitor that a little bit. And I think you're smart enough to monitor that, but it's just useful to be aware of. But then kiss, when is it the right time for a kiss? Well, intensity, some people around is going to be okay, especially if in the location you're at, you can be in a little bit of a secluded location. So it does feel like you and her have your own little cocoon or bubble. And then time. So you just be like, okay, well, I know when I was getting started with dating, I had a very silly way of determining if it was time to go for a kiss. I would look at my watch because I was terrible at reading body language. I was terrible at picking up signs or signals. And I would look at my watch and I'd say, okay, it's been 60 minutes. I guess I need to go and kiss her. Actually, it wasn't a watch. It was a phone, right? But that was my entire rubric for, has it been long enough yet? And I was surprised how many women would kiss me in less than 60 minutes of knowing me. But it spoke to the connection factor, the level of connection that was able to be built through what we're going to talk about in just a second, talking. But another time that's really useful for intimacy, for a kiss, might be, if we're taking a look at time, the end of a date, right? So at the end of a date, things ideally seem like they're going well, or maybe you don't actually know how they're going, but you didn't get the vibe that it was going badly. Well, you may as well go for a kiss at the end, see what happens. She might pull back. I've had that happen. And you know what was interesting? I've had it happen where I thought everything was going well at the date. At the end, I went in for a kiss. She pulled back, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess, it didn't go the way I hoped it would, but, it happens. And then she actually messaged me after, like, hey, sorry, that kind of took me off guard. I really was interested in you. It just took me off guard. I would love to get together with you again. And the beauty about going for the kiss, whether or not you get it, especially at the end of a date, is it really does set the framework. Because certainly by the end of a date, she's going to have some ideas of how she feels about you. So if you go for the kiss at the end, well, then the good thing is, she's going to either want to go on another date with you or not. But now you know where you're at. It's so interesting when I talk to guys and they've been on many, many dates with a girl and they don't know where they're at with her. And it's like, well, have you gone for the kiss? And if you've gone for the kiss and you haven't gotten it, well, she's aware of what you're trying to do. She's aware that you're interested in her. And if she's not texting back, it's because she's not interested, or maybe she'll even say it. But if you don't say that and she just keeps going on dates with you, she may still just be kind of like, I don't really know what I want to do with him. But so it can be useful for you at some point to say, well, hey, this is what I want to have happen. And obviously wait for her to reciprocate. You're not just going full on in. I'm thinking about the movie Hitch where he talks about the 90-10 rule, and that's pretty much true. But it's just useful to realize at some point you should go for it, because otherwise she may just kind of leave it in limbo for a while. Eventually that'll probably put you in the friend zone. And so then why not go for it? But anyhow, that's just taking into account, okay, when would it be useful to be physically intimate? You get to take into account these factors. You're like, okay, well, there's a lot of people around, so probably won't want to do it now. I don't know if we're there yet in terms of how much of a connection we have, but that can start helping you figure it out. Now, what's the next thing you can do? This is my favorite thing to do, because I think it's the best way to build connection, is talk to her. You've got a few different ways, and you're thinking well, duh, Chris. Yeah, I mean, I knew that one. Well, okay, so maybe you did, but talking. And the beauty is you can do talking during some of these other activities. You can do talking while moving. You can do talking while you're doing an activity. In fact, it'll be easier because a little bit of the stress and tension and anxiety will be off of both of you while you are doing the activity, and then you can still have that conversation going. Talking while you are moving somewhere else, pretty common thing to do. And you can just, based on where you're at in the conversation, it's probably going to be a little bit lighter. In fact, it might be about observations you're making as you're going through the place. Wow, did you notice that over there? Oh, wow, look at how cool that is. Oh my God, look at those people right there. Wow, can you believe what she's wearing tonight? This whole ambiance is really cool. You can make all these observations. That's what I just did. I wasn't just for the podcaster. For the podcast listeners, I wasn't just making a bunch of random observations midway through a podcast episode. I was making observations about things you might make if you're going in a club, really anywhere with a girl where you guys are moving together. And And so anyhow, when we get to conversation, there's a few ways conversations can go. It can be light and playful. It can move deeper into the conversation where you're going through the 3 levels of conversation, the things she'll tell anyone, the things she'll tell mostly friends, the things she won't really tell anyone. Those are the super deep ones that really build deep and true connection with somebody else. And all you have to do to factor in those is you'll probably take a little bit of account of time. That's one of the easiest ways to be like, where are we at right now? Like if I'm beginning a date with somebody, I'm typically not going right into biggest regrets or something like that. I'm going to go into, how's your day been? And I'm going to take on a very familiar friend-like way of rapport with her, because it sets a very good, comfortable foundation and context for the rest of our time talking to each other. And then as we go along, I'm going to ask her deeper and deeper questions. And so you can take into account time a little bit here. It's not as big of a factor, but you're not going to ask the deep question as you're saying goodbye to her. That's a more useful time to at least hug, but certainly going for a kiss or make out would be great at the end of a date. Talking, you're going to take into account location. Are we at a bar right now? Now, I will say I've had some super deep conversations with women in bars, at nightclubs, things like that, but it's not conducive to it. In fact, it's better if you're in that situation. You're like, wow, I want to have a deeper conversation with her, and to say, hey, you know what? This isn't the right place. And you say to her, hey, why don't we move somewhere where we can, continue on the conversation? And I wouldn't say to her, hey, how about we move somewhere? I would say, hey, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Why don't we go outside and grab one more drink and finish this conversation out there? That's what I would say, something like that. And but you would shift from the talking to being like, okay, what do I do? How do I bring this conversation further? And well, the answer might be maybe the venue you're in right now or the environment for whatever reason. Heck, maybe there's just a really drunk, obnoxious guy that's kind of screwing everything up. Well, then move and go somewhere else so you can continue talking, digging deeper. And obviously people around, like, she's going to be more open to you generally when it's just you and her talking. There can be other people in the vicinity, but just you and her talking, than if you're talking to her with a group of her friends around, or you're in a group of your friends and you're talking to her. In fact, if you're in a group of your friends talking to her, there's a possibility she'll be a little intimidated because she's like, oh man, like all these people are kind of staring at me or watching. It'll be based on your friends and how sort of fluent they are with social interactions. But I've definitely seen guy friends just stare at me or other people just in a bar while I'm watching, just staring at the friend talking to the girl, and the girl kind of being like, what's going on? Like a little bit of a deer in headlights look. So it's useful to be aware of the people around you. And if you're talking to her when she's with her friends, it can be useful to keep the conversation at maybe a level between light conversation and that like friend level of conversation. And the interesting thing is you can actually talk to her friend about her. You can be like, so how did you guys meet each other? So tell me about that. Okay, so between the two of you, these are examples, by the way, between the two of you, like who's the more wild one? Who's the one that got the other one into more trouble? And you can just have a fun conversation. You can learn about the dynamics between the two of them. The friend will appreciate that you've done that. The friend is going to be like, okay, this guy's fun. This guy's fun because he's engaging with both of us. And it's also helping the girl that you're interested in, see that you're not just comfortable with her, but you're also comfortable with the friend. Now, one other interesting thing is you can even engage with other people in the venue. So this isn't necessarily always the best thing to do, but let's say you really ran out of things to say. Let's say you need to spice things up again, and there's some other people nearby. You can just begin a conversation with them. You can just say, hey, you guys seem fun. Where are you from? And bring them into your conversation with her. The thing you got to be careful of when you do that is they might not leave. So then you're going to be like, oh man, what do I do now? And there are ways to handle that. You could say, hey, we're going to take off and then bring her to some other place. But if she gets super engaged in the conversation, then it could be harder. So sometimes it's useful to take into account, is that a couple too over there? Because then you can engage with the couple. The couple will go back and forth with you for a little bit and usually just go back off on their own. But that is a way of spicing up the interaction and just having that sort of level of connection that you want. And one actually fun thing to do when you're engaging with other people in a bar with a girl is if they ask how you know each other, before she says how you guys know each other, you can actually begin inventing a backstory. You can just say something like, hey, you know what? It's actually a really funny story. And then you can just say whatever you want. You can just riff it. You can just take, and riff it means wing it. It's something that people say in stand-up comedy. Riffing is when you do crowd work, but you can come up with something in the moment that would be playful. I would say, you know what's funny? When we met 10 years ago on a deserted island after a shipwreck, just for a split second before the Peace Corps found us and took us off it, we never thought we would see each other again. So you could say something like that to start the conversation, and you don't have to say that. You can say whatever the heck you want, but you can have this sort of role play dynamic. And the fun thing about that is she's going to be in on it with you. So she's going to start contributing to the story, usually, as long as you're being playful, as long as she's having a good time. And then you can say like, right, honey, like when you didn't expect that to have happen, right? Especially when the seagull came over and like in front of us dropped the fish that we used to survive on for that 3 hours we were on the island together. We didn't know how long we were going to be there. Anyhow, now I'm going into a very weird role play, and you can have your own fun with it. But the cool thing about this is it's going to set up this us like this in joke between the two of you that they won't be really aware of. And you're not being mean. They're just out having a good time too. And they might ask a few more follow-up questions, and you might let them in on the joke, or you might not. But either way, now you have this inside joke between the two of you that's going to be really fun. That's going to spice things up. That will deepen the intensity of the conversation between the two of you. So anyhow, that is the fourth option you have. So far, what we have covered is you can move, you can do an activity, you can have physical intimacy, you can talk, which is what I would typically recommend to deepen a connection. But what do you do? What do you do when you know what needs to happen next in a conversation? Let's say you're like, I know I need to get a little bit deeper with her. I know she needs to understand more about me, about my world. I've told her about, my dog. I've told her about why I got the job I do and, how passionate I am about my family. And you told her all these things. She has too, but you feel like there needs to be more and you're just missing what to do. Well, a prop is a really fun thing to bring out at this point. And I drew a little mystery box here, a bunch of question marks on it for the people listening. And the interesting thing about a prop is you have one. Most of us have one pretty much all the time now. That's our phone. And the interesting thing about your phone is what it gives you access to. So you have all these pictures, and it would be useful were you to want to go down this route. Where you want, like, you can think about this. If you've ever had to give a PowerPoint presentation before, sometimes maybe when you're giving a PowerPoint presentation, well, first off, it's not necessarily fun putting together the slides, right? But once it's there, while you're giving the presentation, you don't have to know every single word that's going to come out of your mouth because you have these prompts along the way that are doing the work for you with the slides. And if you think about that, when you open up your phone, if you were to show her pictures of you, different pictures of you doing different things, which is kind of what your dating app already should be like, your dating app profile, right? Different pictures of you to show a more well-rounded side of you. Well, this is like when you're in real life with her, you can do this too. So you can show different parts about your life so she gets to know you. Let's say you later on want to bring her back to your place or go to another place with her. One way that you can help make it an easy yes. Let's say it's another venue and you want her to go there with you. You could be like, oh my God, there's a super cool venue right across the way and they've got like the coolest drinks that you've ever seen. Hey, take a look. This is one of the drinks that I had last week. And you can show her a picture on your phone of the drink you had. You can show her a picture of whatever makes this place a little bit unique. And what it's going to do is it's going to make her feel a little bit more comfortable possibly going there. Funny thing is, I did this all the time when I was a club promoter. So I would show, first I would like physically point where the nightclub was that they were going to have to go to later on. And then I would show on my phone pictures of some of the best nights of the club. So the girls had a sense of how much fun it could be. And they would get a better sense of what it would be like going there. It makes it an easier way of them saying yes to something. So you can think about the same thing as you are thinking about like, okay, well, maybe you do want to move somewhere. Maybe you're aware like it's something different, right? So where you're at right now, she's very comfortable and you're like, you know what? I really want to make sure she feels comfortable with the next place. So you can say like, hey, you know what I want to do? There's some crazy bars out there, by the way. So again, I'm very much on the bar thing right now, but a lot of my dates aren't at bars. In fact, I live in a lake town, so my dates involve hiking or something like that, but or skiing during the ski season, which is absolutely amazing. But that being said, if it were at a bar and there were another bar nearby, now there's like really cool bars with swing sets and seesaws, and you could show the girl this. Hey, this would be super fun. Let's go do this. Or when I was in Austin, Texas, they had a graffiti park, and you could like just go and graffiti, and there's all kinds of art going on there. So I could say to girls, hey, have you ever heard of Hope Graffiti Park? And then they would say, well, no, or yes, or whatever. But I could show them the pictures and they would get the idea. Or if I had a video of maybe like I have a video of me performing stand-up comedy that I used to show women later on so that they could get a better sense of who I was. They could get a better sense of all of me, and I was funny in it, and so it showed off a lot of good traits, but they just got a better sense of me. Now, it doesn't have to be limited to videos or photos. There's all these apps on your phone now, like interesting apps like face swaps, and you can be like, hey, what would your face look like if mine were? So you can start thinking about props like that. Or let's say you're back at your place or her place, certainly your place. You can have a whole bunch of props that you can play with. So by props, it might be putting on music. You might show her your record collection. You might have a dog or a cat. If you have a dog or a cat and you are not using that as a reason to meet women, you can be saying, hey, I've got a dog or a cat. Like, these are great things. And if it's part of you, well, you're sharing parts of your world with her so she feels more comfortable with you. But again, there's all those silly apps. So you can go and look and check the app store and find apps that are engaging for the two of you to do together. I know there's like an astrology app, or not, there are astrology apps too, which could be interesting, or like a fortune cookie app where you could like look up, randomly generate a fortune, or you could look up her sign for the day and you could read her astrology thing and like see if that's true for her for the day. And so these are all different options that you have available to you. And the prop you can kind of use at any time. There's certainly times that are going to be more useful. Like, again, location is going to matter. You're not going to do this probably on like a sidewalk with a bunch of people moving through. So you're probably going to want to be in a place where you're comfortable. But you could basically think about it as any time that you're at a place you could talk to somebody. Maybe you could also bring out a prop if you're not feeling if you've run out of things to say. So anyhow, this has been a second here, and apologies for all the cuts. The light just kept going out at the end. I think it's just like, dude, how long are you going to talk? Well, as long as is necessary to get the information across. So those are the 5 things you can do, and it's useful for you to just beginning to factor in, okay, well, where are we at with things? What's the intensity like? Are there other people around? How's that going to impact my decision? Where are we located? And also, like, how much more time do we have in our interaction? At what point is it useful to get her phone number and talk about meeting up another time? So those are the 5 things to do when you don't know what to do and you want to keep things going. There is a bonus 6th of letting her decide, of just pausing and seeing what she does. And if she likes you enough, she might suggest something, but these are things that are going to give you the control over as best you can over the date and the interaction you're choosing to have with women. So until next time, really hoping for you, really hoping you have a good time out there dating. My name is Christopher Harders, and this is Men's Modern Dating Secrets. Dating advice for the good guys. Have a good one, guys.